You know, it's just a lot of verbal legerdemain, right? It's just they want to. It's an acknowledgement rather than a promotion. Yeah. It's ceremonial, not official.
Yeah.
You know, it's
right.
you know, they're just trying to make these various apples aren't oranges.
Exactly.
You know, analogy, but it just doesn't really fit to the situation at hand.
By the way,
calling something by a different name doesn't make it something else.
I learned something about this ceremonial deism phrase when I read the early drafts of the brief that the ACA has contributed to.
Okay.
The lawyer in that case went and checked, and he discovered that the whole concept of ceremonial deism, it's not an official legal viewpoint. It's just a phrase that has been used in commentary on some Supreme Court decisions by the justices who were trying to explain their point of view.
Okay.
It comes from a lecture by a law professor who didn't say that there is such a thing as ceremonial deism and that makes things like under God and the Pledge okay. What he said in his speech when it was originally coined is that there would have to be something like an official recognition of the concept of ceremonial deism in order to make under God and the Pledge okay.
Okay.
There would have to be an official recognition. There's never been an official recognition. There's just been a couple of justices in a couple of cases that have referred to his speech and said, yeah, it's kind of like that. That's the reason why it's okay.
So there is not actually anything that actually exists in terms of in a legally defined way.
Right.
That is ceremonial deism. That's understood to be a thing. You know,
that has legal
standing
power or
anything.
authority.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, there's no such thing.
Okay. So this is just some sort of phrase pulled out of someone's hat.
Yeah.
And
it's a blanket term for a bunch of excuses.
And apparently the way they've quoted that law professor sounds like, you know, when some movie review comes out and the critic says, "Boy, this movie sucks so bad, it's amazing," and then on the poster they just put the word "amazing."
Well, I don't know. I don't actually know. I don't actually know what the original what the stance of the person who made the original quote was. He may have been in favor of the Supreme Court adopting that view.
Yeah.
He may have been in favor of it.
But he was not identifying anything in some sort of legally binding sense.
That's correct.
That you know, said here is something called ceremonial deism.
All he said was that it would take something like that in order to justify a wide range of things that the government does.
I see. Okay, interesting.
That are religious.
Okay.
Okay, here's a good one.
Okay.
Under God and the Pledge has become part of the fabric of our society.
Since 1954.
Yeah.
And it was not a part of our fabric of our society for 200 years previous to that.
Well, I mean, there is that. There is that.
But
plus,
again, it's immaterial, right? MTV has become part of the fabric of our society.
Right.
Going back to what you said, slavery was a part of our society.
Yeah.
Slavery was part of the fabric of our society for quite a long time.
Yeah, several hundred years.
Being part of the fabric of our society is not an excuse.
Yeah.
There are all kinds of things that, there's sort of a corollary to this is the claim that, well, you know, various founding fathers said religious things. Well, yeah, various founding fathers owned slaves.
Yeah.
Just because the founding fathers did it does not mean it is something that we ought to be doing that is constitutional or ought to remain constitutional if the Constitution is simply silent about it.
And again, our founding fathers understood the legal distinction between, you know, what it was that an individual was allowed to believe and profess and what have you, and whether or not the government had any business sticking its nose in it.
Well, mostly.
Yeah.
There is the one big sticking point on that, the one big example that I think Christians can validly point to as an example of founding fathers doing something officially religious through the government is congressional chaplains.
Okay.
But really, it's not relevant. Just because there's a thing that they did that is just because they did that thing does not in itself prove that the thing they did is okay.
Yeah.
Even though they were the guys that wrote the Constitution.
Yeah.
Okay. That's the under. That's the part of our culture thing. There's one of my favorite ones.
Okay.
Because it's so immediate. It's so easy to immediately rebut. The pledge has none of the trappings of a religious ceremony. Well, it's got one. It says God. That's really the whole point of the challenge to the constitutionality of the pledge that currently stands. It's got one of the trappings of religious ceremony in it.
Yeah, acknowledging a deity.
Yeah.
Well, what's interesting is that you will hear specifically Christian fundamentalists try to claim that just because you're talking about God in a highly reverent, worshipful way doesn't mean you're doing anything religious. Right, I've spoken to a lot of Christian. I've spoken to a lot of Christian fundamentalists who say they completely disdain the very concept of religion. They're like, oh no, religion, tooey. I have a personal relationship with Jesus, and they try to make that distinction. And I think that is the thinking that is behind that argument there. You know, just because you acknowledge that there's a God doesn't mean it's a religious statement. Well, but in fact, I think though that there is a legal definition of what constitutes religion. And it has to do with some sort of acknowledgement of a supernatural higher power or a deity and reverence toward that deity and what have you.
And so, I find it extremely ironic that the same folks who will pretend that talking about God is not itself religion will turn around and make the claim that if we don't talk about God in our public schools, that's atheism.
Yeah.
They can't have it both ways.
Well, they seem to. Well, sure they can. They do all the time. That's how they love it.
All right.
I want it my way.
Talking about practical reality. I'm talking about rationally. Right.
And it's a bit of a sticking point when arguing with these folks.
Can you say delusional?
If they argue that not talking about God equals atheism, then talking about God equals theism.
Theism, certainly.
All right. Now here, this is the last one that I've marked. There were tons more, but I'm trying to keep this down to some of the more amusing and
just to give you an idea of some of the
and jaw-dropping ones.
Okay.
This is a biggie, but it's a little bit more complicated. So follow with me. Okay. The argument is, it is common knowledge that governmental acts may undergo a metamorphosis from religious to secular. The Sunday Blue laws are the best known example. Okay, now there's references to specific Supreme Court cases. The blue laws in Maryland were challenged on the basis that they were a violation of the separation of church and state.
Okay.
And they were upheld.
Okay.
And in the argument, they say, the court relied on numerous factors in concluding that Maryland's blue laws were no longer nourished by their religious roots, and reciprocally no longer nourished religious practices, nor perceived as doing so. Those factors were, and here's the factors. 1. Recent popular support of the laws was premised on secular considerations. So they're claiming the reason why people in that region wanted to keep their laws, their blue laws, was not because of religion, but because they had secular concerns.
Right.
You know, people driving around drunk on Sundays or on week, Now, of course, that does not apply in this case. There is no, I've never seen, at least, a secular reason why under God ought to remain in the pledge.
Right.
What is the secular purpose of keeping that in there?
It's an oxymoron,
I'm not aware of
right?
it.
I mean, secular reasons for things, secular statements, secular positions about things don't involve deities.
Yeah, right. By definition.
Straight up. Yeah.
By definition. Okay. 2. Judicial decisions dating to the mid-19th century interpreting the blue laws treated them as secular enactments. So they're saying, in cases related to the blue laws, when they talked about whether the blue laws were good or not, they talked about them from a secular perspective.
Okay.
Well, okay. That just raises a big question mark in mind. How they could talk about laws that were there because the religious people objected to the consumption of alcohol on their holy day, right? How they could talk about those secularly. But in any case, there are no judicial decisions related to the Pledge of Allegiance, at least relating to the phrase under God, that have interpreted the phrase under God as a secular enactment.
Right.
There's just no such thing. This is not applicable.
Yeah, so again, the objection to the first point carries over.
Right. 3. The Blue Laws did not single out for prohibition activities offensive to religious sensibilities. Instead, they banned activities that would interfere with, quote, providing a Sunday atmosphere of recreation, cheerfulness, repose, and enjoyment. But that's just a restatement of the first thing, right? First they say that's why the local people wanted to keep them. And then they say, well, that in fact is actually true.
Okay.
It doesn't seem to be the business of the lawyers in the case to decide that. But okay.
Yeah.
Okay, here's the biggie. Number 4. Amendments to the Blue Laws had systematically stripped them of religious references and content. So like the Blue Laws, when they went in, said, it's against the law to sell beer on Sunday because God doesn't like it.
Yeah, it's the Sabbath.
And later amendments to the laws took out the because God doesn't like it part.
Yeah.
And
Now think, how does this relate to under God in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Let's apply this one, shall
You'd
we?
think, right? What we're asking for is a change to strip the religious reference and content.
Yeah,
exactly the thing that one of the points considered by the judges in the case that they're using the case as an example of why you should stay in.
Yeah, because it seems to me the only way to strip
just nuts.
How do you strip it? Yeah, the only way you strip a religious reference out of under God is
you
to
take it out.
Yes, to not say that.
Right.
So, that's beautiful.
And 5. Yeah, that's the biggie.
Yeah.
Right? Because they're saying, here's why we should leave it in. We should leave it in because
they took it out.
Because the arguments in favor of keeping stuff like that worked because they had taken it out. These are lawyers writing this.
Yeah.
Okay.
With short
Great
trains of thought.
lawyerese, right?
And 5, there was no readily available alternative to achieve the state's secular purpose. And again, they're claiming the secular purpose was it would be nice if people didn't get drunk on Sunday, and divorced from religious things. But again, there's no secular purpose to the phrase under God in the pledge. Or if there is, I've never heard it. All of the defenses of it have been in the form of, it doesn't mean anything. It's not hurting anybody. We're all used to it.
Yeah, it's
right?
ceremonial.
That kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Right.
But
Not, if we take it out, it will cause some negative consequence other than making religious people angry.
Yeah, there have been a few people that said that it would cause negative consequences, though. But of course, it's just the sense that kids will be so upset and they will be so enhardened by having to learn the new pledge.
Says who?
No, in fact, they made that argument. I didn't mention that one, but
it's there, isn't it?
It's here.
Yeah.
They argued that
these poor children.
No, let me rephrase that. And be fair to them. They argued, they did make that argument, but the purpose of that argument was to encourage the Supreme Court to take the case. They were saying, this is important for the Supreme Court to make a decision here because if it just stands, then in California, or in the region covered by the Ninth Court, where
they'll have a different pledge.
Court? Is that right?
Ninth Circuit Court.
Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals.
That in that region, those poor children will be thrown into confusion when they have to learn a new phrasing. But wait a minute. In 1954, weren't all the children thrown into exactly the same state of confusion by having to learn a new wording?
Yeah.
That's never stopped them before.
Yeah.
I don't see why.
I think most kids are thrown
into
into confusion just to go on just their first day of school in a new grade. It's like, okay, where's the lockers?
Yeah.
This is the
where's
least of their concerns.
Yeah.